Margaret Anderson had always believed that certain standards needed to be preserved at any cost. As the daughter of a prominent business family in New York, she grew up surrounded by wealth, luxury, and a sense of superiority. To her, wealth and prestige were inextricably linked to family lineage. She viewed anything that deviated from this standard with distrust. When her only son, Ethan, began showing feelings for Jasmine Carter, a young black woman who worked in the Anderson household, Margaret felt that the world she had so carefully built was being threatened. How could her son, educated at the finest schools and raised to uphold the family name, fall in love with someone so unsuitable? Margaret tried everything she could. She resorted to emotional blackmail, reminded him of the plans she had for him, and even threatened to cut off his financial support. But Ethan stood firm. To him, Jasmine was everything he had ever dreamed of in a partner. She was honest, kind, dedicated, and possessed an unbreakable strength. Finally, with his heart broken by his mother's rejection, Ethan made the most important decision of his life. He married Jasmine, determined to build a happy life with her, with or without his family's support. A few months later, Jasmine discovered she was pregnant. Ethan was ecstatic with the news and decided once again to try to reconcile with his mother. He hoped that the arrival of a grandchild might soften Margaret's heart. When little Liam was born, Ethan insisted on taking his son to meet his grandmother. But Margaret remained cold and unyielding. As she looked at the baby, her eyes were filled with indifference. "He's just the maid's son," she said, with a hardness that broke Ethan's heart. She refused to accept that this grandchild, who carried a part of Jasmine, could be part of her lineage. To her, Jasmine and the child symbolized everything that had gone wrong in Ethan's life. Hurt but determined to provide a life full of love and security for his new family, Ethan promised Jasmine they would be happy, regardless of Margaret's acceptance. A few months after Liam's birth, Jasmine's health began to show signs of fragility. One day, while caring for her son, Jasmine felt extremely ill and collapsed. Desperate, Ethan rushed her to the hospital, but in the midst of the chaos and worry, he couldn't find anyone to care for Liam. The day began like any other for Margaret Anderson until her phone rang. On the other end of the line, Ethan's voice was tense and desperate. Jasmine had fallen ill suddenly and needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. In the midst of the crisis, Ethan couldn't find anyone to take care of Liam. The only person who could help at that moment was Margaret. Despite her reluctance and the walls she had built around herself, Margaret agreed to look after the baby. She justified it to herself as simply helping Ethan to avoid an argument, but deep down, there was a part of her that felt curious and maybe even a little unsure about what it would be like to spend time with her grandson. So, Margaret took Liam in her arms and brought him into the mansion. The baby seemed intrigued by his new companion, but Margaret kept herself reserved and distant. In the beginning, Margaret cared for Liam with a sense of detachment. She placed him in his crib, gave him his bottle, and tried to keep her contact with him to a minimum. But Liam, with his innocent and curious nature, reached out his tiny hands to his grandmother, offering her carefree smiles and cheerful giggles. As the hours passed, Margaret's rigid stance began to soften. She noticed that the baby, despite being so small, radiated a lightness and purity she hadn't felt in years. When Liam grasped her finger tightly and looked directly into her eyes, Margaret felt a spark of affection that surprised her. For the first time, she began to see beyond her prejudices, seeing little Liam not as the maid's son, but as a child who needed her, his grandmother. The nights Margaret spent with Liam at home brought long-buried feelings to the surface. One night, as she watched the baby sleeping, she felt a mix of guilt and sadness. The days spent with her grandson stirred memories of her own childhood, memories of when her parents protected her and made her feel loved. Sitting beside the crib, Margaret reflected on the walls she herself had built and realized that, deep down, her pride and prejudice had only isolated her. The innocence that Liam exuded made her question if it was really worth maintaining all the barriers she had created. The love that was beginning to grow within her made her see that her hatred and prejudice had a much higher cost than she'd imagined. When Jasmine was discharged from the hospital, Margaret, in an unexpected gesture, offered to help care for Liam while Jasmine recovered. Jasmine was surprised and, though cautious, accepted the help, sensing that something seemed to have shifted in Margaret. The cold, distant air that had once defined her mother-in-law was now replaced by a subtle but tangible softness. Over time, Margaret began inviting Ethan, Jasmine, and Liam to dinners at her home, attempting to rebuild the family bonds she had nearly destroyed. The journey wasn't easy. Jasmine was still hesitant to get too close, but she could see that Margaret was genuinely trying. These gatherings brought a new atmosphere to the Anderson family, where slowly, old hurts and resentments began to give way to a lighter, more genuine connection. Margaret began embracing her role as a grandmother with genuine warmth and surprising dedication. She became increasingly present in Liam's life, trying to make up for lost time and building a deep, meaningful bond with her grandson. The time spent with him and her constant interactions with Jasmine had sparked a profound transformation within her. In a heartfelt moment, Margaret asked Jasmine for a conversation. With humility, she admitted her prejudice for the first time and apologized for having judged Jasmine so unfairly. "I was never fair to you," Margaret said, her eyes welling up. "Thank you for not giving up on Ethan, on Liam, and even on me, despite how harsh I was." Jasmine, taken aback, accepted the apology, finally seeing that this change in Margaret was genuine. This conversation brought a newfound harmony to the family, allowing Margaret, Ethan, and Jasmine to build a relationship based on respect and kindness. Margaret felt a lightness in her life, a peace she hadn't felt in years. Sometime later, in an honest conversation with Ethan and Jasmine, Margaret shared her deepest reflections. She explained how Liam had been the catalyst for her transformation, showing her that prejudice had only limited her own happiness and isolated her from those who mattered most. Ethan, moved, embraced his mother, and Jasmine smiled with understanding. Determined to use her newfound perspective in a positive way, Margaret began volunteering for the first time. She started supporting organizations that helped young people from humble backgrounds, much like Jasmine, and contributed to efforts that worked to break down social and economic barriers. Her personal experience made her an authentic and dedicated advocate, and she found a new joy in helping others that she'd never imagined possible. Liam's first birthday arrived, and the family gathered to celebrate. Margaret, now fully embraced as a loving grandmother, was radiant. The celebration brought together friends, family, and the people who had become part of Margaret's support circle, reflecting her transformation. In her speech, she moved everyone as she expressed her gratitude for being given a second chance. The love and innocence of a child like Liam can truly transform even the hardest of hearts, she said, her voice filled with emotion. The story closes with a powerful message. Prejudice only brings isolation, while love and acceptance have the power to unite, heal, and bring lasting happiness. Margaret, who had spent much of her life closed off in a world of status and distinction, now understood that by embracing love and letting go of prejudice, she found the purpose and peace she had been searching for. She was finally complete, not because of her status, but because of the family that had now become her greatest treasure.